Hello, and welcome to Buffy and the Art of Story Season 7, a podcast that recaps one episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer at a time, focusing on its story elements. Today, we're talking about Season 7, Episode 7, Conversations with Dead People, where Buffy, Willow, and Dawn talk with the dead or the undead, and Spike's story takes a surprising turn. I am Lisa M. Lilly, author of the Awakening Supernatural Thriller series and the Q.C. Davis crime novels, as well as the Writing as a Second Career books for writers. And today I'll be joined by Steven Youngkin, the host of the Angel retrospective podcast, Wolfram Cast. Along with a recap of Conversations with Dead People, today we'll talk about why what we don't see is scarier than what we do, connecting unconnected stories, a narrative shift for the season, and I'm sure many more topics, because Steven always has so much that's fascinating to say about the Buffyverse. Because this is such a different episode of Buffy, while I'll still go through beat by beat of what happened, and Steven and I will talk about that, we are going to throw some of the rules out the window. Usually I don't do anything that has spoilers for the rest of the series or for Angel, the series, until the end in the foreshadowing. But I think this is going to have to be a little more freeform. So it's all up for grabs. So if anyone out there really hasn't seen all of Season 7 yet, you might want to watch all of it and then come back. Okay, let's dive into the Hellmouth, this time with a friend. Hey, Steven.
Hello there. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you for joining me. As I said earlier, we're talking about Conversations with Dead People. It aired the first time on November 12, 2002, and it was written by Jane Espenson and Drew Goddard and directed by Nick Mark.
When the episode first starts off, what date do they give you? November 12, 2002, 8:01 p.m., which is exactly when it aired on TV.
I did not look back and see that that was the exact air date. Very cool.
Yeah, and 8:01 p.m. because they allowed for that 1-minute recap that they do at the previous on Buffy.
Nice.
This is the only episode of Buffy that was literally done in real time because the entire episode takes place over 1 hour.
I did not realize that.
The stories run in parallel to each other, but this isn't one of those where, okay, Buffy did this and then later on Dawn did that. No, they're all running at the exact same time over a period of 1 hour in the episode. So take that, 24. Buffy can do real time as well.
And I understand, I started to listen to the DVD commentary. So Joss Whedon wrote the Buffy and Holden Webster scenes.
Yeah, they actually had broken this up into the vignettes. Dawn and Joyce was written by Jane Espenson. Andrew, Jonathan, and Warren was written by Drew Goddard. Marty Noxon did the Willow Cassie segment, and then Joss Whedon did Buffy and Holden.
They didn't know exactly what the others were writing, and they all came in with their pages at the same time, which is a cool look into the writing process.
The episode has that feel of being separate short stories just merged together into one big episode.
That's one of the things I find really interesting about it is how well they made them segue into one another at certain points. But it really does, despite being these different stories, hold together.
Granted, some of them, in my opinion, work better than others. Some are phenomenal. Some I wish they had gotten rid of.
And I would love to hear, what is your general take on this episode?
First, just of the series in general.
Sure.
Buffy is still being discussed decades later, 20, 30 years later. And what separates it from other genre programs such as Charmed or Xena or Hercules or any of those shows, which still have a following, but those admittedly are more of the nostalgia view of it. Hey, I remember watching this as a kid. Buffy, on the other hand, is still analyzed by yourself, myself for Angel, and tons of other podcasts and books,
right,
because it pushed the boundaries more than any other network drama. Joss Whedon took chances on the material. He gave us a silent movie episode. He gave us a musical episode. He gave us a pure existential episode in Restless, an episode filled with absolutely nothing but symbolism, which you don't get in normal television. And then also, well, the one that most people, including myself, regard as an absolute masterpiece of television, The Body. And that's what leads me into conversation with dead people. This is an episode that's not like normal episodes. I am actually looking forward to how you're recapping the episode, because in your normal shows, you go through, okay, well, at the quarter point of the episode, we have the turn. Then we have the hero making the commitment, going through normal story beats.
Right.
This one has no traditional story. Buffy fights a vampire. That's her story.
I almost think if I had way more free time than I do, I would take each separate one and break it down and see, do we see those turns? And I did spot some.
They were more done as short stories than full-blown episodes. And unlike normal episodes where, yeah, you will have an A plot, B plot, maybe a C plot, but as you know, they start to merge with each other, overlap, like, oh, because of this storyline, they had to interact with the characters of another storyline.
They affect one another more directly.
Exactly.
I want to say Jane Espenson said this was the only episode, one, where Xander doesn't appear, but also where the characters our key characters never interact with one another.
Dawn is in her own scene. Buffy is in her own scene. Willow, well, the trio are together, but I keep them as one character for the purposes of this. Dawn tries to call Buffy, but Buffy never answers. And Buffy never, during the course of the episode, never realizes Dawn did call her on the phone.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
Willow has no contact with any one of the other characters. In a way, for evaluating the episode, I almost have to treat them as separate mini episodes. In my head, while I was rewatching, I was ranking them from least to best. The least is Dawn. That is the one I wish they had just jutted out of the episode entirely. Because I'll admit, I was in the camp that never really warmed up to Dawn. The casting was wrong because, as you know, she was originally meant to be a much younger character, but they wanted Michelle Trachtenberg. So instead of rewriting the actual character, they just changed the age.
Yeah.
But they didn't change how the character was. She's always been an obnoxious character and not strong enough to own even this mini storyline. Because I'm sorry, the words get out are actually grating on my nerves.
Yeah, and this is the second episode where they have her say that. Back in, wasn't it season 5? She screams that at Joyce.
And that one, unlike the others, has no real effect on the rest of the season. That scene made no sense for what Jane Espenson said that character was supposed to be. Why would the Joyce character act the way that Joyce as character would? It made no sense within the course of the story and in the course of the season.
I have a comment about that when we get to the Joyce and Dawn interaction. I agree with you on that for sure.
Second, least favorite, the trio. Andrew, with the exception of Storyteller I enjoyed because that was a funny episode later in the season. But with the exception of that, Andrew also always got on my nerves, and for an opposite reason, which was that is a case of nerds written by someone who's not a nerd.
Andrew drives me crazy as well. I don't get why people love him so much, but tell me your thought on that. I hadn't thought about that part of like nerds not being written by nerds.
The same reaction I had to the first season or two of The Big Bang Theory, where basically a non-nerd writer will say, oh, all nerds love Star Wars. All nerds will make nothing but pop cultural references. All nerds just love D&D and everything else. And all nerds have social anxiety and don't know how to talk to people. Now, of the three of them, Jonathan was a better written character because, yes, he was off in his own group, as we saw during the high school years of Buffy, but you still got the impression that in and of himself, he's a decent, normal kid.
Yes.
You know, he had his own friends. He never acted nerdish, just, a little bit quiet, off on his own. And he's somebody I could see existing. In fact, I was a Jonathan in high school. I mean, I never tried to take a sniper gun up to the bell tower.
Good to know. But yeah, Jonathan feels like a real character. You like him, I have sympathy for him. He does some things that are terrible, but I would have so much rather have had more of him.
And this is also what I want to mention about the strength of Buffy and why that show resonates decades later. Characters. If it had been just about a cute blonde cheerleader fighting vampires and the characters were as shallow as they were in the original movie, which as a note, I hated.
Yeah.
They kept me from watching the show for the first 2.5 years. If it all was just that shallow level of characters, then once again, we would have a show that would be just appreciated for nostalgia value and nothing more. But the quality of that show, of Buffy and Angel, the spinoff, is the fact that you have complex characters. Buffy is not perfect. Buffy is self-righteous, as she comments in one of my favorite lines of this episode, when Holden describes her as, you have a superiority complex and an inferiority complex about that. I love that line because they never made Buffy out to be perfect. She makes mistakes. She is rude to her friends at many points, like a normal person would be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that does not diminish her, that elevates her. You get the complexities in these characters. That's why I didn't like Andrew, because Andrew, there was no complexity to it. It was just, let's have a wacky nerd.
Right.
As opposed to a Jonathan, who is a more complex nerd. And that's what the thing that saved this storyline was his little speech at the end talking about high school and how he missed it. That felt real because that's an impression a lot of young people, especially in their mid-20s or whatever, I actually have forgotten how hellish high school was. I mean, we can put rose-colored glasses on it.
Right.
And that's why people go to high school reunions partially, because we forgot, oh yeah, I hated you in high school, but how are you doing? But that one could have been done shorter. And in fact, it would have been even better if Warren had less lines and just stood there looking menacing. That would have made that episode even creepier. It was some of that parts was just him standing there just looking menacing.
Those are where it's spooky and and it's unnerving because you don't know yet why he's there, what he wants Andrew to do.
And then that takes us to Willow. Now, Willow is a mixed bag because the episode was originally supposed to have Amber Benson
as Tara and appearing to Willow.
And if it had had Amber Benson in it, oh my God, you would have had one of the best segments of the series. I'm a huge fan of Allison Hannigan in the show. She sells everything. She is empathetic. She knows how to sell pain, and she does carry that storyline. And what they explained in the commentary was that they wanted Tara to come back. Well, there's two versions to the story. One version was that Amber Benson was over in England and she was unavailable to do the episode. The other version that Amber is given was that she didn't want that to be her last appearance on the show and to have the fans think of her in that manner, especially with the request she makes of Willow at the end of the episode. She doesn't want the fans to hate her.
I've also heard she didn't really like working on the show that much.
That could also be. Yeah.
In some ways, there were points that I thought were creepier or more disturbing having Cassie there, or more heartbreaking because Willow can't see Tara and Cassie convinces her at first it's because of what Willow did. But I agree with you, that end, if that had been Tara saying those things,
that would have been a knife in the gut. Also, my other problem was the fact that nothing against the two actresses. Once again, Allison, phenomenal. Azura Skye, who played Cassie, really good in her previous episode, Help. But they just didn't have the same chemistry she and Amber would have had.
Yes.
This is a two-person play. You have to have that chemistry for it to have the tension and suspense and the pathos. Now we get to the Spike. Very good. Wonderful vignette. It was only like 3 minutes in length. I didn't time it, but that was one where brevity was perfect for it. It just told us exactly what we want to see in short little cutaways, since it was done all silent with just music, with a great, phenomenal ending. So that one, just wonderful. And for me, hey, anything with Spike works.
And he has chemistry with everybody.
You could put him opposite a tree, and I would say he has chemistry with the tree. Finally, that takes us to what is probably the reason why Joss listed it as one of his 10 favorite episodes of the series and why most fans regard it as a classic. And I will say it's the best episode of the season, the Buffy Holden storyline.
The two of them are so good together, too.
Yeah, that one, you want to talk about chemistry. She and Jonathan Woodard had it in spades. They played so well off of each other. And for Woodard, he's one of Whedon's 3 hat trick players, which is to be in Buffy, Angel, and Firefly as 3 separate characters.
Yes.
He was so good. He reminds me of the Jeremy Renner character in an episode of Angel, where he plays a former vampire pupil in the episode Somnambulist, where that was early in Renner's career. I commented when I reviewed that episode was he was so good. I wish they could have found a way to bring him back. With Woodard, he was such a good character. I wish there was some way he could have returned. He was just that charismatic. He was just that much fun. You get the sense he was genuinely listening to Buffy. Yes, he admitted, yeah, I'm pure evil, but he was never saying anything evil towards her, per se. The questions he was asking were legitimate therapist probing questions. And you get the feeling that he was, I generally want to help you before I kill you, which made that storyline all the more fascinating. And only Joss could write a pure dialogue thing with just intermittent slight fights and make it compelling. That's a thing very few writers can pull off. And writing dialogue that is clever, but not overly clever, that seems to flow from the characters, which is what's unique with his style of writing. They'll talk through cute lines, but it never sounds fake. I would have been very happy if that had been the entire episode with just the Spike vignette thrown in for what was necessary for the next episode. If they had made that the entire episode, you would have had one of the all-time best.
The others are stories, but the Buffy Holden story, you're right, I agree, could have been an episode in itself.
Oh, yeah, and I would have had no problem seeing more of those 2 characters do a therapy session.
And your point about the dialogue, the character-based nature of it is what makes it work, even though Whedon writes this stylized dialogue that when nobody really talks like, although it certainly is filtered into our language, some of his trademark style, but it's not realistic dialogue. And it is, many of the characters use these same dialogue quirks, and yet they do seem individualized because he makes them different enough. And so much of it, as you pointed out, is directly from their character. He's not having them say things just because they sound cool or, ooh, this has a great rhythm. You buy, this is what Buffy would say. This is what Willow would say.
Buffy does not talk like Willow. Willow does not talk like Xander. Giles and Spike and others all have their own unique styles of stylized dialogue. Any Buffy fan without even knowing the context of the line would be able to tell, yep, that's a Buffy line, that's a Willow line. And that's one of the other reasons why I love the show so much.
So I pretty much agree with your ranking. I might have some different reasons for each one, but that is about how I would put them as well in terms of what I liked the best. Though it did not occur to me to do that. So I'm so glad that you did. Breaking down what happened. And this is the first point that is a little different right from the beginning, because often we start out with some sort of conflict. It might be emotional conflict between the characters. It might be action. And here we more have a moment or two that sets the mood. An amplifier is turned on. We hear clicks. Someone picks up an electric guitar, and we see the title in quotes on the screen, which I'm pretty sure is the only time that happens. Or is there another one where they actually have a title card?
Buffy fans out there are probably shouting out the name of the episode right now.
Oh, Once More with Feeling, which is interesting because it's another one, as you mentioned, that is that very different kind of episode. This one is a little different than that because it's a black screen, just white lettering, no other flourishes. There's conversation in the background. And then, as you mentioned, that date comes across the screen, November 12th, 2002 at 8:01 p.m. A keyboard opens, there's drum sounds, a cymbal, and a singer starts singing at the Bronze. Joss Whedon wrote this song for the episode with a co-writer whose name I should have written down and did not.
Angie Hart.
Oh, great. Oh, that's also the singer. Okay. I'm so glad you had that because I felt bad that I was only noting Joss's name there. I didn't realize when I was first watching it that he wrote the song for it, or they wrote the song for it. And it makes sense because it fits it so perfectly.
The man taught himself how to read music just for the series, and for Dr. Horrible, writing 2 different versions of songs for that one. Okay, the man has more talent than I want to give him credit for.
Oh, I know. It's just not fair.
Exactly.
The lyrics fit. It starts out with night falls, I fall, and where were you? It includes the line, I died. It's very haunting. And we cut to Buffy patrolling in the graveyard as the song plays. And on the words wolf grin in the song, we get a quick cut to Spike at the bar, which I thought was such an excellent time to cut to him and gives us a feel for what we're going to see. Buffy kind of meanders between the tombstones, and we cut to Willow, and she's in the library. She's really tired. She's studying, but she looks like she's dozing off. Another fast cut to Dawn coming home to an empty house. It's dark, and there's a note from Buffy that she and Willow won't be home until late and to get some pizza. And the lyrics say, "Can I spend the night alone?" Buffy kneels at a fresh grave and a hand bursts out of it, and Buffy says, "Here we go." And we go to credits.
Just as a note, there was actually 2 other storylines they were considering including in here, because as you had mentioned before, this is the only episode of the series that Nicholas Brandon does not appear in, making Allison and Sarah being the only 2 performers to be in every single episode of the series.
Oh, okay.
We're going to include Xander with a storyline, the dead person he was going to meet, Jesse.
Oh, wow.
Now, just as a reminder to fans out there, I can forgive you if you're listening right now and you're saying, who's Jesse?
Yeah.
Played by Eric Balfour, he was Xander's best friend, other than Willow, who was in the first 2 episodes only. He has not been seen or referenced since The Harvest, since he died in The Harvest. He was basically the Chuck Cunningham of the series, a character that existed, was very important at the beginning, but then gets dropped off and no one ever mentions him ever again throughout the entire rest of the show.
But he did have an important role in the sense that he told us right off that the show would kill characters we think are important, and he was in the credits.
No, actually he wasn't.
Oh, he wasn't?
No.
I thought he was in the credits.
Joss wanted to include him in the credits.
Oh, that's right.
The network said, no, you're not allowed to, because Joss wanted to do that purposefully to send out that message saying you can't trust anyone. Now, he did get away with that later in Angel, where he did include Glenn Quinn in the credits for him to die early, and for reasons that listeners of my show will know. But the only character in Buffy who was ever introduced into the opening credits and then promptly killed off that same episode, Amber Benson.
Yes, that was
Eric Balfour was only in the guest starring credits that they do after the opening credits. But that one I'm glad they didn't include, because once again, everyone would sit there and go, who are you again?
They'd have to spend all this time reminding people who Jesse was.
And then the other one they were considering of using was Anya, and having her meet up with Kali Roca as Halfrek. That one, I'm glad they also got rid of, because with Anya, there's not much to the character, especially at this point where she was turned into a Cordelia clone after Charisma left to go over to Angel. They altered Anya to be the blunt talking, I'll just say whatever's on my mind, no matter how insensitive it is, which is what Cordelia used to do, but then they had to have a new character do it, so they made Anya be that character.
Yeah, and I think, too, I love Hallie, and I love Anya and Hallie together, but Selfless was such a powerful ending when D'Hoffryn kills Hallie, and I feel like to bring her back so soon, I just don't think it would have the same resonance. It almost, to me, would take away from that. Anya had her whole episode in Selfless, and what are you going to do that wasn't done there?
Granted, they explained it was because Kali Roca was busy with doing stage work in New York. But once again, I'm just glad they didn't include it.
After the credits, we get to see Andrew and Jonathan. So that's when we discover they're in this episode too, and they're driving to Sunnydale from Mexico. Andrew criticizes Jonathan for taking a roundabout way, taunting him and saying that Jonathan is scared. And Jonathan says, yeah, of course he is. And I kind of love the way he says it. Last time they were there, 33.3% of them were flayed alive.
That was a good line.
And it's a nice way to get in quick reminder to the audience about Warren. And it comes out through some minor conflict between them, which is my favorite way for exposition to be revealed. Andrew is reassuring Jonathan that they have a plan that will fix all that. Jonathan still thinks maybe they should have stayed in Mexico, but Andrew didn't like it there because everyone spoke Mexicoan. And Jonathan says, you could have learned it too. You learned an entire Klingon dictionary in 2.5 weeks. And Andrew responds, that had much clearer transitive and intransitive rules, okay? Which is an Andrew line I actually really like, because who doesn't love transitive and intransitive verbs?
Just one comment, which is on one hand, cute line about the transitive and intransitive verbs and learning Klingon. It's the Mexicoan line. Because what it does is it makes Andrew and Jonathan out to be idiots. It's one thing to say, oh, nobody there spoke Mexican, just to reflect that you're ignorant enough not to know what language they actually speak.
Right.
It's another thing to make up a whole new word for Jonathan not even to comment that there is no such word as Mexicoan. That's where it gets into non-nerds writing for nerd characters, because they assume that they must also be ignorant.
Yeah, I was going to say the Mexicoan it's an example of Andrew, to your point, just kind of, oh, he's just a wacky character. Right. Jonathan and Andrew talk about, Andrew says he can't keep having the nightmares. Jonathan agrees, and he speaks in Spanish, which I don't know how to pronounce this. Maybe you do.
Desde abajo te devora. I believe it was Andrew who used that. And I will use the right word, Spanish phrase, not Mexican phrase, not Mexican phrase. He uses that phrase. And then Jonathan repeats it in quasi-English, saying, it eats you starting with your bottom. Now, here's the problem. Obviously, neither of them took a day of Spanish because they got everything about that wrong. First of all, the phrase, desde abajo te devora, is actually translated into English as, from below, I devote you.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, I translate it from Spanish to English, and that's what it comes up as. So they didn't even get that translation right. And then the correct translation from beneath it devours is desde abajo devora, not te devora.
Oh, okay.
And just as one side further note, because I'm this anal, if you wanted to translate it eats you starting with your bottom, the Mexicoan version of it is te come empezando por el trasero. Nothing like what either of them said.
Yeah. I assume that was intentional, that they're showing these guys, they were there, but they barely picked up any Spanish.
Because they mentioned the Klingon, I was just curious enough. It eats you starting at your bottom, just for those who care to know. Ak hak de chog. And then from beneath it devours. That
is great.
You have somebody to translate Klingon.
I knew there was a reason I asked you to come on the podcast.
I am a nerd.
But not like Andrew.
No, I actually have a life.
Jonathan and Andrew now agree they're going to make things right, and they pass the welcome to Sunnydale sign. Even though this is a non-traditional episode, them entering Sunnydale is right about 10% through, which is where you should by then see your story spark. So we have Jonathan and Andrew's story, which really starts when they come in to Sunnydale. So it's neat that there's a bit of a timing thing. And then each of these vignettes is going to have its own inciting incident or story spark, but the timing is obviously going to be different in this episode.
For listeners, they might remember the previous episode where we saw a Welcome to Sunnydale sign, which was in School Hard, where Spike came crashing through. Apparently, Sunnydale has dropped in population because in School Hard, it had a population of 38,500. Now in this one, a few years later, it's down to 32,900. So, yep, that graduation really took out a good chunk of people.
Yeah, no kidding. And maybe some people figured things out over the years and moved.
That's true.
And I think it's a neat connection that the last time you saw it was when Spike came into town, and we're going to have Spike as part of the vignettes here.
Oh, yeah.
And he is a danger again, which he was when he came into town then.
Yeah, this time for much different reasons, but yes.
Right. Not as purposefully, as we'll find out, but that's not till next episode. The next scene is Buffy fighting a vampire who has some really good martial arts moves. Then we cut to Dawn eating pizza. She seems to be having a pretty good time, and she says, anchovies, anchovies, you're so delicious. I love you more than all the other fishes, which Jane Espenson said was because a local pizza restaurant stopped making anchovies available, and she was trying to convince them to add them back on.
Oh, yeah. She's made it her mission and personal crusade whenever she writes episodes for teenagers to mention how cool anchovies are.
I wonder if it ever worked.
I gotta love that for a reason to include a scene. I just want the restaurant to start making the food I want again.
Yes. And Dawn, I kind of enjoy Dawn here. Like you, I often find the character annoying, but I like that she, instead of in season 6, she would have been really sad and maybe she would have been kind of whiny about it. And I had some sympathy for Dawn. She was alone a lot, but the way the character was written, it was hard to want to see her. And here she's having a good time. She's pretending, well, first she gets pizza sauce on Buffy's sweater and then shrugs and says, Buffy will think it's blood. And she uses weapons and acts out fighting like a slayer and puts a hole in the wall when she shoots it with a crossbow and then covers it with a plant.
One comment about the pizza, which I give credit to the show for later on doing a subtle callback to it, because in a later episode, First Date, Buffy is getting ready for her date with Principal Wood, and she's having Anya help her get rid of the same stain that's on this shirt that Dawn gets the pizza sauce on. And then in that episode, Anya is having trouble getting it out, and she even says, I'm not even sure this is blood. It might be pizza.
Yes.
It's a nice subtle callback.
It's one of those things that's so fun when you rewatch, because it's like, oh, right, this is a sweater. She also dances around. There's mariachi music playing, and she puts a marshmallow in the microwave to watch it expand. And then it's about 5 minutes, 39 seconds. So we're still kind of close to that 10% mark. And her story really starts where there is this banging sound. And it's that first hint that there is something supernatural, and Dawn is really startled. And this shifts the mood quite a bit. Until now, she was having a good time, but we don't stick with her. We cut to Cassie walking into the library, which starts Willow's story. Cassie, probably everyone will remember, is from the episode Help. Buffy tried to help her because Cassie knew she was going to die at a certain date and time, and Buffy was not able to stop it. And Cassie comments on how the UC library is so big. And Willow says, hey, I know you, or something like that. And then she amends it to, well, I saw your picture. Because as you pointed out, Willow only saw her online. She never met Cassie. And then Cassie says, yeah, she knows it's kind of weird because they've never really met. And Willow has a great line, or kind of weird because you're really dead. Willow then asks, did I fall asleep? And she was dozing earlier. And maybe you know, Steven, I was wondering, was Dollhouse on yet? Because that was such a big line in Dollhouse, did I fall asleep? And I didn't know if it was a reference.
No, because I remember it had not premiered yet, because that was the show Eliza Dushku did after she did Angel and Buffy.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm thinking that was just a coincidence of lines there. Yeah, in Dollhouse, that was a prominent line used throughout the show, as you mentioned, because that show I loved and hated at the same time. And I do remember that line being used by the dolls whenever they would, quote, wake up.
Cassie assures Willow she's really there and comments on how ironic it is that she wrote all that intense poetry about the end and she's there again. She sits down and tells Willow that she asked Cassie to talk to Willow about something important. So she doesn't use Tara's name. And I think through most of it, I don't know if she ever says Tara's name. She always says she or her.
But she makes it very clear who she's talking on behalf.
Oh, yeah, we know right away. And Willow knows.
Yeah, she remembers when she sang and all that.
This is where that comes up. Willow asks who, and Cassie says she still sings. And Willow says Tara. And oh my God, Willow's face communicates so much of how she feels.
That moment just breaks your heart. She has that look of, oh my God, the woman I love.
Yeah.
That is a case of show, don't tell, because as listeners of my show might know, I often criticize episodes for doing too much exposition, not making use of the fact that this is a visual medium. You can sell stuff with images or expressions. You don't need to spell everything out. And that look on her face is perfect example of that.
Yeah, so much more powerful than if she just said all her feelings. And we cut from there back to Dawn, who's on the phone and watching TV, talking to a friend who I'll just note she later calls Kit.
Mm-hmm.
I never caught that before. So that's Kit from Lessons. Right. So I've been saying those three never come back, and they don't. We never see them, but apparently Dawn still talks to her on the phone.
Right.
In my head, I always thought she was talking to Janice, her friend from last season and maybe season 5 as well. She's saying something about the character is clearly a psychopath. Dawn is watching what looks like a suspense or horror movie. And then she says that that's not Tom Hanks and goes on, well, what channel are you on? Which I thought was pretty fun that they're having this conversation, but it also hints maybe there is something weird going on. Maybe Dawn is watching the same channel as Kit, but it plays a different show because now there's more banging. Dawn says she keeps hearing this thumping and she mutes the TV, goes to the door, I guess, to look and see if anything's out there. And there's all this wind. She can barely shut the door. And that's when she asks Kit if she is still there. She then hangs up the phone, which makes no sense to me. If I were petrified and something was banging outside my door, I would not hang up the phone.
No, not when you're talking to a person. You may need to have them call the police.
Right. And on top of it, it's Kit. So she knows that weird things happen. It's not someone Dawn would have to be like, oh, I can't let them know about the ghost and supernatural and vampire stuff that happens. But nonetheless, she hangs up, runs to the TV to turn it off, which doesn't work. She unplugs it. It still keeps playing. And we go to Buffy and the vampire. One thing the Dawn vignettes do is that's the one that is the most kind of traditional horror, or at least an attempt to make it like traditional horror, where we have these things like the TV won't shut off, and there'll be much more like that. Buffy and the vampire are still fighting in the graveyard, and he's getting in some really good punches. He grabs her and he's staring down at her like he's about to bite. And then he pauses and pulls back and says, Buffy Summers? He tells her he's Webbs, Holden Webster, and reminds her who he is, and they were in a class together. He helped her with some of her work, and she says, sure, clearly not remembering who he is at all. We go back to Dawn, who now smashes the TV, then smashes the stereo as well. And the music left still playing is from the kitchen. I think it's a boombox, so we still have that mariachi music. Dawn goes in, the microwave now is running again, and that marshmallow is still in there, so she runs toward it. I couldn't tell if Dawn smashes the microwave or does it explode before she gets to it. I wasn't sure which.
It looks like it blew up. It blew up the glass at her.
That's what I thought too. And on first quick watch, I thought she did it. But yeah, there's now glass all over the floor. And then there is a sizzling sound and then static from that boombox. And we get a pretty major turn in Dawn's vignette because Joyce's voice says, Dawn? And Dawn says, Mom. And we cut to a commercial. So a pretty big shift for Dawn's story. And it is getting close to the quarter way through the episode. So there is a little bit of each of these stories is starting to take a turn. Buffy's was that Holden is someone she knew and went to high school with.
Going back for just a moment, Jonathan Woodard, who played Holden Webster, was in the episode The Message for Firefly. Yes. And for fans of Angel, he easily one of the most hated characters in the entire series of Angel. And it's not because he was annoying, but he played Knox, who was responsible for Fred's death.
That's right. Yes. Oh my God.
In this case, you were supposed to hate him. One of the series' best episodes, A Hole in the World. The other two actors, just for trivia's sake, one was Andy Umberger in Firefly. He was in the pilot episodes, the captain of the Union of Allied Planets.
Yes.
In Angel, he was in an episode I panned wildly. I Fall to Pieces. He played Dr. Ronald Meltzer. And then in Buffy, you saw him just recently in Helpless. He was D'Hoffryn. Whenever you need me, Chance. Yeah, I still love that line.
Oh, I love him as D'Hoffryn. I looked him up. Boy, he works all the time.
Oh, yeah.
He was in so many things.
And then the other actor, Carlos Jacot. Firefly, he was Lawrence Dobson in technically not the pilot episode, but the first episode aired because Fox aired them out of order.
Oh, right.
And the first episode aired called The Train Job. And then in Angel, he was Richard Straley, the nice guy that was marrying Doyle's ex-wife in the episode Bachelor Party.
Oh, right.
Fun episode. And then in Buffy, he was Ken, the guy from literally from hell in the episode Anne.
Season 3 pilot, the one running that home and getting people down into literally hell, as you said.
Exactly. So those are the three actors who managed to play three totally different characters in three totally different series made by Whedon.
It's not surprising because they're all really good.
Oh, yeah.
Holden, when we come back from commercial, so we had that shift for Dawn. Holden now reminds Buffy that he worked on Pippin. He did the lighting design. And my first thought was, you do realize nobody saw you doing the lighting design who saw the show. But then he says she helped him move the lighting board and he dropped it on her foot. Now Buffy apologizes for not connecting it before. She didn't recognize him with the demon face. I'm not actually sure Buffy still remembers him.
Oh, she's being polite.
Yeah, she fakes it.
What I love about this dialogue, and this is why, as I said, I love the Buffy storyline so much, is how they're suddenly interacting. Just a second ago, they're busy fighting like any traditional fight she has with any of the vampires. But now they're talking like they are at a high school reunion, or they just happen to meet each other in the mall.
Yeah, and Buffy is being polite, right? Like you said, she doesn't want to make him feel bad that she does not remember him, even though her goal is to kill him.
This is the nicest she's been to any vampire outside of Angel, possibly. And it justified because he's coming across as very friendly and nice. And once again, just a nice guy. Yeah, he wants to kill her, but he's still genuinely nice guy. Oh, yeah, you probably don't remember me and all that. You get the feeling when he was immortal, you would probably have genuinely liked him.
Yes. And I enjoy it because it reminds me of in my other life as a lawyer, I always appreciated when I had opposing counsel, the lawyer on the other side of the case, who we developed a good relationship. So we could argue in court. There was one case I had that went on like 5 years and we had the same argument over and over in the trial court and the appellate court, but we became like colleagues. We'd ask after each other's families. If something went wrong in our lives, we'd call up and be like, hey, you need me to reschedule something, tell the judge you can't make it. And I always appreciated that.
Because that also reminds me of a similar thing when I used to be a college instructor. I was in the teacher's lounge one day. It was in between classes. Me and this other teacher, we started debating heavily about, I think it was team mascots. Me and this other instructor started going at it, loggerheads, almost yelling at each other. If you listen outside the door, you'd swear you'd almost have to call the cops on us because we were going at it so passionately. And then suddenly we looked down our watches and saw a class was about to start in about 5-10 minutes. We paused. Great debate, Roger. Great debate, Steven. And moved on. It was never personal. It was just, we were just intellectually going at it very hard. That's the impression you get here almost with Buffy and Holden, where neither of them are taking their fight to the death personally. It's just, I'm a vampire, you're a slayer. We have to fight. I guess that's the way things are.
It just occurred to me, it's a variation and a contrast to when Anya and Buffy fought in Selfless, because Xander keeps trying to get in the way and Anya says Buffy has a job to do.
Right.
And so do I. And he's like, did everyone take their crazy pills today? Now you can argue there that Xander wasn't completely wrong. Like maybe there is another way. And it turned out there was. But still, that idea of you're doing your job. And here Buffy's doing her job. The vampire's going to do his. But they're having these nice moments.
Exactly. As I said, they're not, neither of them are taking this fight personally.
They start talking and she says she thinks that he filled out a little and he tells her he got into Taekwondo at Dartmouth. Buffy seems so genuine when she says that's great. And she asks what he's been up to and he laughs and says, apparently dying.
I love that line.
Yes. He tells her he's a psych major. He did an internship at Sunnydale Mental Hospital, which was a little bit of a reference to Normal Again. Presumably that's where Buffy was in that episode in the alternate world. And he asks her if she remembers this classmate, Jason Wheeler, Crazy Jay, who always had a shtick about, I'm crazy, I'm crazy. And Buffy asks how he is, and Holden says crazy. His face then turns human, and that's where he asks her about what happened. And she explains eventually he'll be able to turn his face purposely from vampire to human and back. And he says, so I'm a vampire. How weird is that? And Buffy says, sorry. But he tells her, no, it's great. He feels strong and like he's connected to this powerful, all-consuming evil that's going to suck the world into a fiery oblivion. And he asks, how about you? And Buffy says, not so much connected. He asks her about carrying that cross and stake around, and she tells him she's the Slayer. And he asks if she fights vampires professionally. And Buffy says, well, I don't get paid. It's more like a calling. I was thinking about this running thing with Watchers get paid and Slayers don't. And I like that they actually have Buffy point that out.
Angel, the series, brought up early on there where Angel started charging for his services, because I had a debate, which was the fact that it's okay for Angel to charge for his services. That doesn't make him less of a person. But then in the previous episode, Flooded, when Anya dared to bring up that exact same suggestion, she's considered gauche for daring to suggest Buffy do the same thing that, well, her boyfriend is doing just a couple hundred miles away down in LA.
Yeah, and like you said, Angel wasn't super comfortable with that either. No. And then Doyle's explaining, people pay you and then they can feel they're done with you. They don't owe you anymore. They need it as well, which I thought was a really good point.
Oh, yeah.
So Holden now tells Buffy that he heard rumors about her in high school. She was all mysterious, which Buffy seems sort of pleased about. And then Holden tells her a lot of kids thought she was dating a really old guy, which I thought was funny.
That made me laugh.
Yeah, given Angel. Or that she was heavy religious, all the crosses. Right. And he goes on that Scott Hope said Buffy was gay, but he said that about every girl he broke up with. And then he came out as gay himself.
Which I like her description of Scott Hope. Ringworm.
I forgot about that. Yeah. And then she comments on how she really knows how to pick men. And Holden says, wow, all this time she was a Slayer. And Buffy tells him the Slayer. He asks, you mean as in the only one? And she says, pretty much, which I like because that's a little bit of a nod to Faith is still out there. Holden says, so when you said not connected, that was kind of a telling statement. And I love this because Buffy puts her hands on her hips and says, Psych 101 alert. She tells him she really doesn't want emotional therapy with the evil dead. And as she insists she's connected, her phone behind a tombstone rings and she doesn't hear it. I thought this too was a pretty big shift in Buffy's story. I don't know if it would be one of the major plot turns or not, because there was a big change just that Holden knew her. But now he's identified this problem in her life, this lack of connection. And the story really does turn because, as you mentioned, they're going to have kind of therapy sessions after this.
That's exactly what it turns into in the upcoming scene, where she is actually laying on a grave as if it's a therapy couch.
Yes, that's hilarious.
And he starts acting like an actual therapist, like making the reference to her describing herself as not connected. Yeah, making use of his Psych 101 and his time of working at the Sunnydale Mental Hospital.
That's a good point, that they do work in there that he didn't just take classes. He had work experience. We cut to Dawn now. It's about 12 minutes, 30 seconds through the episode, so a little more than a quarter way through, and she's leaving a message for Buffy. She's really scared, but then she picks up the boombox and is begging it to do it again. She wants to hear her mom's voice. Behind her, or to the side, we see this flash, and Joyce is on the couch, but when Dawn looks, she's not there. So I don't think Dawn sees it, and there's noise all around her. And then Dawn looks, and there are chairs up on the table.
The quick flash, if for those who freeze frame it, Joyce is in the exact same position, exact same outfit that she was at the beginning of the body and at the end of I Was Made to Love You. For all I know, they just pulled like a quick shot or whatever and merged it in.
I noticed the same position, but yeah, I didn't realize it was the same clothing. And I think that's really effective, whether we pick up on it consciously, that is how we last saw, we saw her body later, but it's how we last saw Joyce, how Buffy last saw her before she realized she was dead. On the wall, the letters "Mother's Milk is red today" appear, and it looks like it's written in blood that's dripping, and then that disappears. And I found that pretty creepy. I don't know, what did you think of that?
Cliched. It's something you would see in movie Poltergeist or Amityville Horror or The Shining. It's a standard haunted house trope to have a creepy phrase written in blood on the wall. Yeah, it was creepy. I think, once again, it's just going back to the Buffy and Holden one was just so clever that going back to Dawn, where it's traditional, nothing really different.
Yeah, a lot of it felt a little bit, in the best light, like an homage to these kinds of horror stories. Buffy, though it is in some ways a horror show, doesn't really do that very often.
No, they've done they've done mummies, they've done Frankenstein.
Oh, right. But they don't usually do like the jump scare thing that much.
Closest they've ever come to that is in the classic episode Hush. That's still the creepiest.
Those were real scares. For other reasons, I am one of the people who didn't love Hush that much, but it was scary, and in a more original way. To your point, this is kind of the haunted house fare, and we get more because there's more banging. Dawn now starts screaming, which it's hard to blame her for screaming. This would be pretty scary if it was really happening, but it goes to that. I just don't know why they always direct Dawn to screech. So she's screaming out, "Why are you doing this?" She's yelling at it to stop. Finally, the noise stops, and she says once if yes and twice for no. And then she basically says, "Mom," and there's one bang, and she asks if she's okay, and there's two bangs. And then Dawn asks if she's alone, and there are two bangs. So no on both of those. The whole house shakes, and then we cut away from the scene. Now we're at Jonathan again. He goes down on a zip line, drops into the school, and Andrew then also comes down on a zip line and falls, which reminded me of the episode with the freeze ray.
Did like that nice contrast between the two characters, because Jonathan comes down very gracefully, easily, and then Andrew, falls on his face.
That was a good way, to your point, it was a good way to show a lot about both characters visually and very quickly. In the high school, it's dark, there are noises around them. Jonathan wants to go get Buffy right now, tell her what they know about the seal of Danthazar, and Andrew says Buffy won't believe them, they'll end up in jail. another nice reminder that they were involved in Warren's schemes and that they were in jail briefly. Andrew says they need proof and tells Jonathan to think of it as a quest. Find the seal, help Buffy destroy it, save the world. And he says, quote, then we join her gang and possibly hang out at her house, end quote. Which is fun because ultimately, though I'm not that thrilled with it, that is what Andrew ends up doing, first as a hostage or guestage, and then really join her gang and mostly just hangs out at the house.
And then in the comic book continuation, he is a legitimate member of the team, in a sense, training some of the new potentials.
They allude to that in Angel, right? There's the Angel episode where Andrew shows up.
When he comes to retrieve one of the Slayers.
I just can't buy Andrew in that role. I just can't.
No, not at all.
They do try to move him that direction in this season. It just never works. No. He and Jonathan are looking for the principal's office, which, as we know from previous episodes, is over the Hellmouth. And they decide to split off after checking communications on their walkie-talkies. So there's a scene when they're both saying, check, 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 check.
3 inches away from each other.
Yes, which is fun. Jonathan asks if Andrew really thinks that Buffy and friends will let them join the gang. Jonathan then disappears around a corner and Warren appears to Andrew and tells Andrew, nice job. And I have some sympathy for Andrew here. He tells him he's really scared and it's hard to act so brave and he hates it when Warren leaves him. And then he says, one time you died and I ended up a Mexican. The actor did a great job with this. You really felt how much Andrew missed Warren and how hard it was for him, even though it doesn't justify what he does. Warren reassures him it's all part of the plan, and he alludes to Ben Kenobi in the original Star Wars and says something about if you strike me down, I'll become more powerful. And we don't know what he's telling Andrew to do. And I feel like this is him reassuring Andrew, oh, you can kill Jonathan and he'll just become more powerful like Warren did.
If you're referring to the line from A New Hope, Kenobi line, as to why Warren said that, it has nothing to do with Jonathan. What it does is it has to do with the fact of, as you mentioned, that Andrew was upset that Warren is dead. And so Warren is saying, no, I may be dead, but I'm even more powerful now than I was when I was alive. So actually, me dying is a good thing. You don't have to feel bad about it.
That makes a lot of sense. That is what Ben Kenobi was also still there for Luke, right?
In the comic books, season 8, which is canonical, and Joss Whedon helped write it, and he said, no, this is officially part of the mythology. In the series The Long Way Home, spoiler, Warren lives. He's still flayed, but he's still alive. He was saved from death by Amy Madison. Now, the reason why I mentioned that, because in this one, he's the first.
I had heard that about season 8, but I didn't think about that. You're right. How can he be appearing? How can the first appear as Warren then, if Warren's not dead?
In a letters page in issue number 6 of the season 8 comic book, Joss Whedon responded to the question of how the first could have impersonated Warren if he never died. His explanation was, quote, well, he was legally dead for like a second. Amy didn't tell him because she didn't want to upset him. He pauses and says, I forgot, okay?
I believe he forgot, although that isn't a bad explanation.
Warren and Andrew's dialogue is nothing but pop cultural references.
Go for it.
First, we have Hey McFly, reference to Back to the Future. Bell's microsecond, Echo 2 to Echo 1. That was Star Wars A New Hope. If you strike me down, I will become more powerful than you can possibly imagine. Once again, A New Hope line. The reference to Jonathan as Short Round. That is the Indiana Jones's kid character, played by Academy Award-winning actor Ke Huy Quan. And then finally, the line that they end it with, that boy is our last hope. And then, no, there is another from The Empire Strikes Back. That's the Yoda Ben Kenobi dialogue.
And then Andrew's really confused because he's like, wait, is there? And Warren's like, no, just going with it.
Now, that one I like Andrew's reaction, because that one I could actually see me and a friend doing. Like, he starts off doing it, and then I didn't quite catch at first. Oh yeah, he's just continuing with it.
Right, because you would think he was really using the lines to make the analogy and connect, and he's just doing the bit.
Yeah.
So after that moment, we cut to Willow, who says, "Tara, is it you?" And Cassie tells Willow Tara couldn't come herself because of what Willow did, what I mentioned earlier. And she says, quote, "You killed people, you can't see her," end quote. She is both so happy that Tara can hear her and so sad that she can't hear Tara herself, can't see Tara. She says she misses Tara. Cassie looks really sympathetic. She tells Willow Tara can hear her, but that Tara is crying and she misses Willow too. Willow talks about how hard it is every day, and Cassie tells her it can get better. Willow is strong like an Amazon, remember? Which calls back to the body. Then we cut to Spike, and he's sitting alone at a bar. A blonde woman walks over and sits next to him and sets her pack of cigarettes, or she just sets the pack of cigarettes down near him. And that's all we see, but it really tells us a lot.
What is it with these blonde chicks and vampires in these shows?
That's a good point.
Jaws has a thing for blonde girls because in every time it's a blonde chick who needs to be saved or who is turned into a victim by a vampire, it's always a blonde girl.
That's true. This is a blonde coming up to Spike, and we know what's going to happen here. Although at this point in the episode, we don't.
Yeah, because Spike is good. He has a soul and also the chip.
You're right, the soul and the chip. At 19 minutes, 48 seconds. So we're coming close to the middle of the episode, and Holden is saying to Buffy, as she's lying on that crypt, he says, "So you meet someone, you form a bond." Such an interesting line because they just met and they are forming a bond, though that's not what he's talking about. They are talking about relationships, and she mentions her parents not being paragons of stay-togetherness. He suggests she's protecting herself by not getting involved, but Buffy points out she hasn't done a great job of protecting herself from heartbreak, sexual violence, possible death, but he says from committing. And Buffy insists she commits, she's a committee. And then she says, "I think you're confusing me because you're evil," which I really loved, the whole denial aspect of being in therapy.
It's a cute delivery because it's not even said sadistically, but actually very friendly and nicely, which I like that.
Yeah, she's not being snide about it or she's not attacking him. She's just like, "You're confusing me. It's because you're evil." And he suggests she ease up on herself. It's not like she has the patent on bad relationships. And Buffy comments that wouldn't it be cool if she did? He asks a question that I've always had for this season and Buffy's angst. He says, what, is she supposed to be settling down already at 21? And then he talks about how much he felt for his girlfriend at college, but he's not going to go off and vampify her. And that's when Buffy tells him that it's called to sire someone, and it's also a noun, which is going to come back later. Holden comments on how much he has to learn, and he says, "Come on, isn't this insane? I mean, I was afraid to talk to you in high school, and now we're like mortal enemies. Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we became nemesis?" And Buffy says, "Is that how you say the word?" This is a nice connection to the Andrew Jonathan Warren story because of early season 6, when, was it Andrew who said, "We're your nemesis, sees?"
Actually, it was Warren and Buffy.
Okay.
Who, when they entered each other, neither of them could get the word correctly. Warren was saying, "We're your arch nemesis."
That's right. And then she repeated it. I do like that subtle way of referencing the geek trio. And it's just a nice thing for the fans who remember.
That's what the show did very well. Just little tiny in-jokes.
And Holden says, "We're going to have to fight to the death, aren't we?" And Buffy says it's the time-honored custom. And he tells her he feels the bloodlust and it could be fun and it's been great catching up. And Buffy agrees, but then she looks sad when he jokes about looking up his friends from high school after this. And he asks why she's not too thrilled. Is it because they're going to fight? And Buffy says, "It's 'cause I'm gonna win." This is right around the middle of the episode.
she is forming a bit of a bond with Holden, and she realizes, I'm gonna have to kill you, even though I genuinely don't want to. The last time, outside of Angel, of course, and becoming part two, last time I really recalled her having that type of look on her face was in the great episode Lie to Me with Billy Fordham.
Yes.
She didn't do it with any joy at all. She knew she had literally no choice.
She felt for him. She understood why he chose to become a vampire, Ford, because he had cancer. But it's not okay for him to be killing other people.
Yeah.
So this was about 22 minutes through, and so it's a little past the midpoint of the entire episode, and it isn't a gigantic reversal for Buffy. Often we see a big reversal in the middle or a big commitment, but it is hard. She has to kill this vampire that she has actually made a connection with, and she let herself be vulnerable with him and share some things that we find out she has probably not even told her friends. But he laughs at her, saying that she'll win, and reminds her about his martial arts and vampire strength. But she tells him she can't let him leave the graveyard. And that's when he tells her she has a superiority complex. He insists on asking her one thing when she says she doesn't. Who's at fault for her parents' divorce? And she says it was her dad. She thinks he cheated. And Holden asks if all the relationships that she knew were doomed. Is it possible Buffy had trouble connecting to the guys because maybe she thinks they're not worth it, and maybe she thinks she's better than them? The idea of being better, maybe this was not intentional, but it made me think of Faith and Buffy when Faith tells Buffy, we are better. Mm-hmm. At the time, Faith seems fine with that idea, but obviously down the road, she struggles with that aspect of being a slayer as well. Having all this power, it takes her to a very dark place. Maybe this is part of why Buffy has even more trouble with the concept of she is stronger than most people or than everybody, because she doesn't want to embrace the Faith attitude of, oh no, it's great, we're better, we can do whatever we want. And yet we find out she doesn't really feel she can connect with other people because of it. Holden tells her he's not blaming her. She's chosen. She has a destiny. Who could live that life for 7 years and not feel superior? But now Buffy says she doesn't feel superior. And if anything, and she goes on, if you knew what I've done, what I've let myself become, my best friends don't even, you laugh if you heard some of the things I've done to them. And Holden says, Buffy, I'm here to kill you, not to judge you.
I love that
I
line.
do too.
And also, you would have laughed at some of the things. Well, at the end of season 6, when she encounters Giles and repeats everything that happened to her, what is Giles's reaction? He laughs.
That's right. I didn't even think of that. He laughs, and then she laughs as well.
Exactly. So she's not wrong on you would laugh at some of the things that I have done. And what I still like about the Holden is the fact that even when he's saying that she has a superiority complex, he's not mean about it. It's not like, oh, when Angelus would say something cutting to Buffy, Holden, he's acting like an actual therapist. He's giving legitimate advice. That's something any therapist would have said to her upon hearing the same thing. It's actually a pity that Holden was turned into a vampire, because he's the high school counselor that Robin Wood should have hired, because the kids would have loved him.
He would be really good at it.
If he had somehow or another survived Buffy, I could see him actually forming his own therapy practice, brings in a victim, gives him legitimate counseling, works through the problems, and then bites him and kills him.
That'd be an interesting show. Buffy tells him now that the last guy she was with, and she doesn't name Spike, she just says that and says she behaved like a monster, she treated him badly. At the same time, she let him take me completely over, is how she puts it, and do things to her. Buffy gets really teary and doesn't notice when Holden steps away. And as she's saying she doesn't know what's wrong with her, Holden grabs a Virgin Mary statue off a monument, tells her nothing's wrong with her, and slugs her with it. She's on the ground. He leaps on top of her and says, everyone's got issues. Fits right in with your idea for a psychotherapy practice for Holden. He's about to bite Buffy, and we cut to a commercial. On return, Buffy kicks Holden away, and she's really angry. She thinks she'll kill him a little more than usual, and he tells her, come on, it was a sweet moment. She opened up, and it made him want to bite her. She attacks him, and they crash through a stained glass window into a mausoleum. Then the scene cuts back to Dawn. There's all this growling in the background. The house is pretty dark. There's something moving around that we can't really see. And Dawn asks, is it hurting her mother? And we see Joyce on the couch now, and this is different. This monster is over her. Joyce has her mouth open like she's screaming, and Dawn yells at the monster to get off Joyce to let her talk. Dawn clears a space on the floor, and then this scythe swings at her, and she falls back and screams. And I think there's some blood on her, but she's not actually cut. And she jumps up. She starts to leave the house, and a voice tells her, get out. She opens the door to the wind, but then she yells no and slams it shut and says, she's my mother, I'm staying. Which is, for her, I think, a little bit of that midpoint commitment we sometimes see. She's not leaving the house. She's going to help her mom.
The creature that's on top of her is actually the Gnarl costume from Same Time, Same Place, shot from the back and spray painted black.
Oh, really?
They just shot it from the back so you couldn't recognize it right away.
Then we cut to Jonathan and Andrew. Jonathan is confused. He's looking at a map, and Andrew says, there it is, because he sees Warren appearing in front of a door. I found that moment kind of scary. And I think, to your point earlier, it might have been more effective if we didn't see so much of Warren. If that was the first time we saw him there, that'd be scary.
Yeah, that was one of those menacing moments that I was referencing early on.
So they go down into the basement, and we cut back to Buffy. Now she has the advantage. Holden is on his back. She's over him with a stake. His face looks human again, and he asks her, is she killing him because he's evil or because she opened up, which I find hilarious. And a good tactic, because Buffy, disgusted, nonetheless stalks away from him, although she comes back and kicks him in the face.
He had a move to stop the stake, according to him.
Yes, that's true. He does clarify that. She rants about vampires, how that's what she hates about them, sex and death and love and pain. It's all the same. And he says that's a guy thing, but Buffy argues with vampires, it's different. She knows. And Holden says, oh my God. And then there's some fun byplay where she says, oh, your God, what? And he responds, well, not his God, and then pauses to ask if God exists. And is there any word on that? And Buffy says, nothing solid. Holden takes off his sport coat and he proposes a deal. They will fight to the death, but first she has to answer one question. And if he's right, he gets to ask anything he wants to know. And the question is if her last relationship was with a vampire. This is one of those really nice segues because we cut to Spike walking outside with that blonde woman. They're talking. They seem really companionable, like they're having a good time. And that's all we get for the moment. And then we cut to Willow. She is talking to Tara through Cassie about Warren and what happened. She says, it was horrible. I was horrible. I lost myself, the regular me. And Cassie says, you were grieving. But Willow says, a lot of people grieve. They don't make with the flaying. Cassie tells her it's the power. That's the problem. But Willow says she is the power. It's in her. She talks about all the people she hurt. And Cassie tells her things are clearer where Tara is. And they can see Willow's path, and she has to stop magic immediately. And Willow agrees, but she clarifies black magic. And Giles said, you can't just quit cold turkey. It's not that simple. But Cassie starts telling her it's too dangerous. She can't take chances doing any magic. She'll lose control. And though Willow says she doesn't ever want to cause them much pain again, Willow says she won't. She'll be okay. And I love Willow's confidence here because she has been so nervous about doing magic and spells. And it's nice to see her saying, I'll be okay. But of course, Cassie then says that Tara says, you're not going to be okay. You're going to kill everybody. and we cut to commercial. So good hook for the commercial there. And this is a big turn again in Willow's story, because after this, it's not so much Willow trying to connect with Tara. It's Willow trying to understand what Cassie's saying and first being frightened of it and then figuring things out. We go to Jonathan and Andrew. They're digging and they're uncovering. What we see is the seal underneath, and they're talking, and Jonathan says he hopes Buffy will know how to destroy it. And that's when he remembers his locker combination. And Andrew asks why he's trying so hard to remember high school. And this is that moment you mentioned before. Jonathan says he misses it. Andrew is skeptical, and Jonathan says time goes by and everything drops away. All the cruelty, all the pain, all the humiliation, it all washes away. I miss my friends. And as he's saying this, Warren appears behind Jonathan, smirking a little bit at Andrew. Jonathan says, I miss my enemies. I miss the people I talk to every day. I miss the people who never knew I existed. I miss them all. I want to talk to them, you know? I want to find out how they're doing. I want to know what's going on in their lives. And Andrew kind of seems affected by this at first, but then he says, you know what? They don't want to talk to you. All those people you just mentioned, not one of them is sitting around going, I wonder what Jonathan's up to right now. Not one of them cares about you. Jonathan has a really nice line here, and he says, well, I still care about them. That's why I'm here. And we see that the whole seal has been completely uncovered. Dawn now says she'll cast this beast or this monster out, and she throws sand or ingredients. She does a spell and she keeps shouting and screaming, and these cuts appear on her face, and she gets thrown against the wall. There's glass shattering everywhere. And I have a question. When did Dawn learn to do all of this? That's always bugged me.
Only thing I can think of is during Buffy's death time, when Willow and Tara were living rent-free.
Yes.
Still the one story element that I agree with every single fan out there of, why didn't they ever contribute to the money? Setting that aside, well, she probably did have time to go through some of their spell books just out of interest and all that, and then also just hanging out at the magic box, because it doesn't give the impression that she is really conversant in it as much as she may know of a spell to cast out a demon. So that part I can buy.
Probably that is it. Or maybe over the summer when Buffy was starting to train her how to fight. I just wish here and there we would have seen a little hint that Dawn was learning these things. I have the same reaction later in the season when suddenly Dawn has read this spell in Sumerian. They spend so much time having Dawn scream and not having much for her to do. Why not here and there work in some things making that more clear? And maybe they're there. It's a while since I watched all of season 7, so maybe there will be something.
That's one of those where back in lessons where it looked like at first they might have been tuning up for a Dawn spinoff, where they're going to use that as a bridge of Buffy is now Dawn's watcher, as it were. She's training Dawn the way Giles trained Buffy. If they had continued with that as a theme of, okay, now I'm training you in this, and Xander's going to train you in that, or so on and so forth, then yes, that would have made a little bit more sense. Oh, we'll have Willow come in and train her how to use magic safely. But you're right. It's just one of those where whenever it's convenient, Dawn knows how to speak Sumerian. Oh, in this episode's convenient, she knows how to cast spells.
Yeah, that's how it feels. It's like convenient. Oh, okay. We'll say she knows how to do this. Back to Buffy and Holden, as Buffy is saying that the joke is he loved me in his own sick, soulless way, but she didn't want to be loved. And Buffy says she has all this power she didn't ask for and doesn't deserve. She says it's like she wanted to be punished, to hurt like she thought she deserved. I never really bought this in Buffy's character. Joss Whedon wrote it and he knows the characters, so I guess that must be part of her character, but it never quite rang true for me. But I have a lot of issues with the way the Buffy Spike relationship was written. Holden's listening really sympathetically, but Buffy says it's complicated. She offers to just fight, but he tells her to go on, and she tells him she's worse than anyone. She's beneath them. She feels not worthy of their love because although her friends love her, it doesn't mean anything. Their opinions don't matter because they haven't been through what she has. They're not the slayer, she is, and sometimes she feels like she is better, superior. Holden points out she can't win. She has a superiority complex, but has an inferiority complex about it and says kudos. So that point that you raised earlier. She tells him it makes no sense, but he says it does. It all adds up to her feeling alone, but everyone feels alone. And he adds, quote, everybody is until you die.
There's actually dialogue they had originally written in the script that does another episode callback when she uses the line, I have all this power, I didn't ask for it, I didn't deserve it. It's like I wanted to be punished. Now, the original script had this instead of that line. It was, Buffy, I just wanted to be touched, to be reached. Were you here when everything turned into a musical? Holden, I missed it. Buffy, I explained it a lot better then, with rhyme and all, but I can't go back to that. Holden, and you think you might? You still might be attracted to this guy? Buffy, well, he's changed a lot, a lot, a lot. But no, I just can't feel as low as I did then and do what I have to do. Things are getting worse. More of you guys are rising and something's coming. Which I could see why they cut that for time purposes.
See, I like that a lot better.
I do too.
All the things Buffy's saying in the musical, those all fit to me. Her disconnection there in more so than what she's saying here. That's great. I'm so glad you shared that. I would have loved to have that in the episode instead. So after saying the thing about until you die, Holden says, speaking of, and he asks if she's ready for the death match. She guesses she is, but she thanks him. And he responds that you can only tell some things to a stranger. And Buffy tells him he's not a stranger, which is a really nice moment between them. Then she starts to say something about, quote, that stuff with Spike, end quote. And Holden says, hold it. Did you say Spike?
This is where I give credit to Jonathan Woodard. I'm not sure if it was in the original script or not. As he's saying, so you ready for a deathmatch? He's stretching, like tuning up for a fight, cracking his back.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And once again, it sends out the message that, especially to him, this is not personal.
And it's another great segue because after he says, did you say Spike? The scene cuts to Spike. And now he is, looks like outside her house or apartment saying goodnight. Then we cut to Dawn and we're getting to the climax in each of these vignettes, which is where our opposing forces have their final confrontation. Dawn, her face cut, there's blood, she's yelling, I cast you out with every breath, there's debris flying, she keeps yelling, she throws a bowl of something else. At 37 minutes, everything clears, it's all quiet. Dawn falls to this floor and Joyce appears in this glowing light. She's wearing a white robe-like dress. And then we cut to the start of the climax scene for Willow. She is shocked at what Cassie said about her killing everyone. And Willow agrees to do no more magic, but then asks, what about Giles, who made it sound like she'd go off the deep end if she stopped completely? Cassie tells her if she does one more spell, it'll be a disaster. Willow says she's not strong, not an Amazon. What can she do? And this is where Cassie says there is one thing. And she goes on that then Willow could see her, meaning Tara, and wouldn't have to talk through Cassie. Willow says Tara's name, but then her eyes narrow as Cassie urges her to go ahead so everyone will be safe and Willow will be with Tara again. And Cassie says, it's not that bad. It's just like going to sleep. Willow stands and says, who are you?
This is a moment I was referring to. If that had been Amber Benson, it would have been a gut punch.
Yes.
Tara encouraging Willow, having the person you love most in this world encouraging you to die.
It would be so much harder for Willow, harder for her to recognize that it's not really Tara. She'd want to believe it was Tara, and then to have to step back.
Yeah, but then to have that realization, and because that would have made it even more powerful for her to stand up and look at Tara, realize you're not Tara. Tara would never ask her to die.
Yeah. It would also be heartbreaking that Willow would realize here she thought she was talking to Tara again and seeing Tara, and then no, that's ripped away too. Now we go to Buffy in the climax of her episode. This is a key moment between her and Holden because Buffy asks how he knows Spike. And Holden says that Spike, quote, "What's the word?" end quote, was the one who sired him. And that's when we cut to Spike lunging at that blonde woman and biting her. All the segues between Buffy and Holden and the Spike scenes are the best ones in the episode. Now we cut to Joyce again, who tells Dawn that things are coming, that she loves Dawn and Buffy, but she says Buffy won't be there for Dawn. Quote, "When it's bad, Buffy won't choose you. She'll be against you." End quote. Joyce fades away as Dawn is yelling, "No, no," and is there alone in all this debris of the house.
This is what I was talking about when I said the Joyce character makes no sense. On the DVD commentary for this episode, Jane Espenson, who wrote this segment, revealed that the image of Joyce was another manifestation of the first. And in fact, when Joyce appeared, Dawn was supposed to say, "They said I couldn't bring someone back." And then Joyce would reply, "Maybe I'm the first."
Oh, interesting.
Espenson, in the book Bite Me, the Chosen Edition, the unofficial guide to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, said in an interview, "Here's my memory of what was intended." And believe me, there was a lot of discussion of this issue in the writer's room, but some of it took place without Joss there and thus cannot be trusted. I believe that what was intended was that this was not Joyce, that it was the first, but that Dawn's erroneous suspicions that it was in fact Joyce were to be fueled by the events of the episode in which she thinks she's the next Slayer and she's not. This is also what leads to why I'm a little bit confused when we have the first appearing as Warren in the trio storyline. That makes sense. Okay, fine. Well, it says the canonical. Oops.
Right.
He's appearing to Andrew. He's manipulating Andrew to achieve the goal that you're going to reference in the next scene with the trio.
Yes.
That makes sense why the first is appearing the way he is. So that one I follow plot-wise. In the Willow storyline, it's revealed that Cassie is also the first. That makes sense why she's doing what she's doing, because the first realizes how powerful Willow is. So you want to neuter her as...
Yeah, take her out.
Exactly. Take out the most powerful foe. And if she can convince Willow to commit suicide, bang, Buffy is down a major fighter at that point. And she's going at it in a way that makes sense. I'm appearing as someone that Willow loves. Maybe I can convince this girl to kill herself. What was the goal of the first in this one?
Yeah.
Dawn is not that powerful, so it's not like, oh, well, we need to neuter her like we do Willow. No, it's not like with Jonathan's death that achieves an end that the first needs. No, that doesn't do anything there.
No.
And then also, it's not like she's appearing as Joyce from the beginning and trying to convince her, a la Cassie, to separate herself from Buffy, as if that achieves anything at all. No, she scares her, says a vague line, disappears.
Right. It sows some doubt about Buffy, but that's it. Also, does the first, we later find out kind of the rules for the first, is it's incorporeal and it can't physically affect anything, right? It can only influence others to do things for it, like the Bringers or down the road Caleb. So how is it that it can blow up the microwave and give Dawn cuts on her face and do all these other things?
Throw a scythe at her.
Throw a scythe at her, right? Because later we establish it can't do any of these things. And I looked And I thought, okay, some of it's illusion, so maybe it can make things appear to people like the blood on the wall, but the house is destroyed. It clearly is physically affecting things.
It moved the chairs into that position.
Right, right.
And then, as you said, the glass shattering, that shattered the TV and all that. Yeah, those are physical objects it affected. So this is where I was saying at the beginning, they could have killed this entire segment. Unlike the others, which have an effect on future episodes. So yes, story and plot wise. And then also, as I said, it's inconsistent for the character in terms of the rules and in terms of its motivations. As I said, the others, I understand why it was doing what it was doing. This one, I have no idea what its objective was.
If you really stretch it, you could say perhaps this plays a tiny bit into when everyone throws Buffy out of the house or Buffy leaves. Dawn is saying to Buffy, well, you can't stay here. It's my house too, and you can't stay here. That maybe there's a couple seeds sown here for that.
One, that was the entire group, including her best friend, Willow.
Right.
Who actually led the charge on it. And two, the first never struck me as having that much three-dimensional chess strategy.
Yes.
Later on, we'll bring in an ex-priest, and somehow or another, Buffy will make a stupid mistake of attacking without being prepared. And so then, no, that's thinking a little too many steps.
At the end, Buffy does try to send Dawn away out of the fray of the final battle. But yeah, why would what aim does this accomplish?
In that case there, okay, well, yeah, she was right then, but Buffy wasn't doing a bad thing at that point. So
no.
So it's almost like, unlike, once again, with Willow, where there was the objective to hurt Willow. In this case, if we go with, well, she's predicting what will happen to Dawn later, then she's not really hurting Dawn as much as she's just playing psychic.
Yeah. So what difference does it make? I agree. You could take this out. It would make zero difference at all. And we could have gotten more Holden and Buffy. In the next scene, Jonathan and Andrew, they've uncovered the seal. Jonathan is brushing off his hands and he sees Warren for the first time. And as he's distracted by that, Andrew stabs Jonathan. This story is really from Andrew's point of view, and we find out he's really the anti-hero, right? He came there to kill Jonathan, which is a pretty good twist.
Tip to future actors, Danny Strong stated later that when he read the script with Tom Lenk on the way home from a convention, he skipped the last part of the script. He didn't notice the part where he dies.
Oh God, really?
Yeah, it was Tom had to come to him later and said, oh, by the way, John, in this next scene, I stab you.
Did you notice you died?
Danny's reaction was, what?
Oh God. Of course, we will see him again as being the first, but you should not skim the end of your script. Yeah.
Especially if you're doing a show about vampires and demons.
Especially when even the main character has died.
If they're willing to off the title character twice, everyone's up for grabs.
So now we're into the falling action of the episode, which is pretty short. It's already 39 minutes, 55 seconds. So we've only got a minute or two here. And Cassie says to Willow, suicide thing was too far, huh? You seem so ripe. Willow again asks who she is, and Cassie goes on about how it would look if Willow killed herself and kind of mocks all of Willow's pain and the things Willow has said. Willow tells her to stop, and then Cassie threatens all of them will die horrible deaths, and then says, quote, the whole good versus evil thing, balancing the scales. I'm done with the whole mortal coil, end quote. And she ends that she's going for a big finish. And Willow says, from beneath you, it devours. And Cassie says, or really the first says, oh, not it, me. And then she smiles. And I find this so unnerving, the visual here where her smile just grows and her lips stretch and her teeth show. And she kind of like devours herself.
Yes. That was a CG, even though it still looks dated like a lot of their CG.
Yeah.
That one actually still holds up for the creepiness.
It is extremely disturbing. And Willow is left standing there alone, and the song from the opening starts again. We get a long shot of Dawn alone in the house that's almost destroyed. Jonathan falls on the seal with his arms out, and Andrew, with Warren behind him, watches. Spike drops the woman's body to the ground, and Buffy stakes Holden. And the song ends on, "Can I make it right? Can I spend the night alone?" Same word that began the action of the episode. So powerful.
Mm-hmm.
In all of the vignettes, the falling action, those last scenes might be among my favorites, just each one of them alone and in that last action.
Yeah, same here, because very quiet, just showing the impact of these characters isolated from each other.
Yeah.
Very elegantly done.
Especially on rewatching. The first time I saw this episode, I have to say I did not like it, and I think it's because I just wasn't prepared for it to be such a different episode. I didn't know what it was going to be. And maybe it's because other episodes already in this season kind of didn't go anywhere or didn't really have a point. And I was like, oh, is this another one of those?
Well,
might have been Dawn's vignette as well. But this is one that on rewatch and many rewatches, I got so much more out of it.
it did end up winning a Hugo Award.
Oh, it did. I didn't realize that.
I didn't look up to see which category it won it for. Even though, yes, I trashed the Dawn storyline a lot, and I still do, just as one last side trashing of it. The other reason I had a problem with it is it also didn't cover any new material, because in the previous episode, Forever, what did we have? We have Dawn missing her mother and trying to bring her back in a somewhat scary fashion.
Yes.
We've already been over that material with her. And that one, well, frankly, was done better.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that we went through that emotional journey with her.
Yeah, because that one having the monkey's paw element to it. One of your previous episodes, you made a reference of the fact that a lot of these episodes tend to be going over similar material again. And I know in one of your episodes, you said maybe it was a homage. No, I think it's just lazy writing.
It feels like it. Some of the references probably were intentionally homages, but I agree. I think a lot of it is.
It's one thing to do a homage like in the cut line of, remember when we had to do it as a musical? That's one thing. That's just a throwaway line reference or reference to Nemesis. Oh, is that how you say it? You know, that's one thing. It's another thing to pull a plot wholesale out of a previous episode and just change some of the elements. That's lazy writing. But what works in the episode works very well. So that's why I don't want listeners to think, oh, well, I hated the episode. No, I'm quite opposite. I do think it's the best of the season. And I can understand why people love it so much. And it is because of the Buffy Holden storyline is the series showing how good it can be.
We've covered a lot. Is there any last thoughts you wanted to add?
Okay, just one nitpick in anticipation for your next episode of Sleeper. Sleeper contradicts this episode in two elements involving Spike. First of all, if Spike is really turning all of these people into vampires, just jumping ahead, spoiler for Sleeper, why did we see him bite the blonde chick in the neck and just have her fall to the ground dead? Why isn't she being sorry? Because that was the entire point of Sleeper, is the fact that he's not so much killing them, but turning them into vampires.
Maybe he just wanted to kill that one, but right, I agree. It's because you find out there are all these vampires he's created. Yeah.
Second nitpick that's contradicting the following episode is the fact that, once again, we're told in that episode that Spike is dragging all of his victims to the basement and burying them there. And we find out that Holden is one of the victims. Where was Holden found at? Not in the basement. He was found in a cemetery buried. And so, result, I guess he's not putting them all in the basement. So it's nice that the very next episode, they contradict this one very quickly.
I have to watch and see if does he say he buried all of them there? But you're right. Why would just one be like, this one, I'll just leave him for his family to find so they can bury him?
One other side note, I've read in like one of the other books that I use is when I put together my comments for these episodes, because I pull from a number of different ones. And they point out one thing, which is the fact that a slight contradiction in the series itself, which is most of the vampires are male. Who are most of the victims? Females. Are there female vampires who are constantly siring males? Because whenever we see a vampire attack, he's not going against another guy, he's going against a woman. Yeah, but yet we see a whole bunch, the majority of vampires we see are dudes.
Here's my theory. The female vampires are just smarter, so they stay away from Buffy and don't get killed.
Well, hey, look at how long Darla avoided getting killed. And Drusilla.
That's right. So maybe that's the answer. They're all like Darla and Drusilla. She never gets killed, does she?
Nope, never.
She's still out there. I think we've solved the mystery.
Female vampires are just smarter.
On that note, thank you so much for joining me for this episode.
Thank you for having me on. It was fun to do.
That is it for this episode. Thank you again, Steven, for joining me, and thank you to all of you for listening. If you want to hear more about Angel, check out Steven's podcast, Wolfram and Cast. I will be a guest on it soon to discuss the episode Darla, which was a companion episode to Buffy Season 5, Fool for Love. Buffy and the Art of Story will be taking a short summer break. In the meantime, if you are a patron, you can check out the Patreon bonus episodes. The last one compared the two Buffy Love Spell episodes, Season 2, Bewitched, Bothered, and Bewildered, the Valentine's Day episode, and this season's Hymn. Keep an eye out for new bonus episodes as well. And please come back for the regular podcast episode, Season 7, Episode 8, Sleeper, where Buffy is determined to find out if what Holden told her about Spike is true. And we see Giles again, but he is in grave danger.